One of the biggest pieces of feedback that I often gave as an interviewer when I was interviewing students for investment banking roles at my firm was that they just came across as too scripted or too robotic. I still remember how I felt in September of 2019 as a sophomore in college when I got an email in my inbox that said, "Congratulations, X New York-based investment bank has selected your application for a first-round interview." And I immediately reread the subject line of the email to make sure that I hadn't misread anything. And after that, I reached for my phone. I immediately texted my older brother and I said, "Holy crap, I just got a first-round interview with this investment bank." Now, this was a moment that I'd been fantasizing about for a long time, ever since I had set my sights on investment banking as a freshman in college. I was, at the time, just enamored with the idea of working in a really big city, advising Fortune 500 CEOs on multi-million-dollar mergers and acquisitions, and earning a six-figure salary right out of college, which was just the absolute dream for someone who grew up in a middle-class family, going to public school for high school, and was the son of two immigrant parents. But after that feeling subsided, the reality started to set in, and I realized that I had no effing clue what I was doing. Now, fortunately, there were a couple upperclassmen that I knew who had gone through the process who were kind enough to lend me a interview guide that they had called Breaking into Wall Street. It was like a 300-page PDF, and they told me that, hey, if you can get through this over the course of the next week, then you'll be fine. But keep in mind that the interview, as I mentioned, was coming up in just 1 week, and at the time, I had just finished taking Accounting 101 the semester before, and I hadn't taken a single corporate finance class, and so I didn't know jack about finance. But for the next 7 days, I studied feverishly in a caffeine-induced frenzy to try and cram as many finance concepts in my head as possible. And so I spent many late nights trying to memorize things like enterprise value or unlevered free cash flow as I prepared for my interview. For those of you who are new, my name's Matt Huang, and I'm a current associate at BCG, which is a management consulting firm. And prior to BCG, I spent over a year working in M&A investment banking. Now, I make these videos because I like to, but also because I would have wished that somebody would have made these for me when I was a student. Now, I wish I could end the story by saying that after just 1 week of prep, I managed to nail the interview and ultimately land an offer. But while that would make a great story, that would be completely false, because what actually ended up happening was after a whole week of prep, I still didn't really know what I was talking about, and I was so nervous, quite frankly, in the interview that I bombed it and never got past the first round. Now, in the end, I did end up working in investment banking, but there were numerous failures that got me to that point. To put it into perspective, in college, I networked with hundreds of investment bankers, interviewed with roughly 15 investment banks, and ended up with just 2 offers at the end of it all. And this is coming from someone who went to a traditional target school, had a 3.8 GPA in undergrad, and also had some relevant finance internship experience when I went into my recruiting process. Now, I don't say this to discourage you, but rather to emphasize the fact that I definitely could have improved my batting average if I just realized sooner that I was making the 3 mistakes that I'm about to share with you guys today. Okay, so mistake number 1 is thinking that you have to have unique reasons to want to do the job. Now, in the beginning, when I just started my journey in investment banking recruiting, everyone I spoke to told me that, hey, you need to have a really great why investment banking answer. And I clearly remember talking to someone who was an analyst at Goldman Sachs, and I asked him at the end of our call, hey, do you have any advice for me for how I should best prepare for these interviews? And he told me, yeah, definitely. Just, make sure that you really think through your why investment banking answer and have a really unique response that, sets you apart from the other candidates that we're interviewing. And so I said, great, well, that sounds awesome. And I thought to myself, okay, that must mean that I need to have a really unique response that stands out because investment bankers are, really busy, right? And they're interviewing tons of candidates, correct? The truth is that couldn't be more wrong. What ends up happening when you think that you have to come up with a very special response for why you want to do investment banking or why you want to work at a particular firm is you end up trying to manufacture reasons that may not be necessarily true, but also run the risk of coming across as not very believable. And that is the worst thing that can happen, is for your interviewer interviewer to think that, oh wow, this kid is just making up some BS. And I'm going to tell you guys the brutal truth right now is that there is nothing that you could possibly think of that somebody else has not thought of before. There is no special reason that you can think of for why you want to do investment banking that some other person in the past hasn't come up with before. The truth of the matter is that there are no unique messages. There are only unique messengers. And what I mean by that is there's no reason or no idea that you can come up with for why you want to do investment banking that hasn't been thought of before. But the magic happens in an interview when you are able to bring together your unique set of experiences, which nobody else has, and tie it into why you actually want to do investment banking. So for example, let's say that your reasons that you want to use in an interview for why you want to do investment banking are that you really like finance and you really want to get the skills and the credibility of doing investment banking. Now, you could just say it out like that, but the problem is that that sounds a little bit canned and isn't going to be as compelling to the interviewer as if you say something along the lines of, well, yeah, so I really enjoyed my corporate finance class at school, and so that led me to pursue an internship last summer in the financial planning and analysis department at a big corporate, and while that gave me a really good understanding of how internal reporting works at a large company, I still really want to get more exposure as an advisor instead of a client to multiple businesses and understand really what makes a good versus a bad business. So you see, what I just did is I created a story that tied in multiple experiences from my life and still told the interviewer that, one, I am interested in finance, and two, I am looking to continue to build my skills and knowledge in business. But I said it in a way that nobody else could replicate because it was using my own experiences, my unique experiences. And so this is one of the big truths of interviewing that I think the sooner you internalize, the better you're going to be and the better your results are going to be, because the magic is never in the actual reason itself, but the way that you tie in all your experiences. What matters most in an interview is not about listing the most number of credible reasons for wanting to do a job. It's about making the interviewer believe that all of your experiences have logically led you to this point and that it only makes sense for you to do this job. Now, before we get into mistake number 2, if you're enjoying the video, make sure to hit the like button and comment below if you've made any of these mistakes. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing. I really appreciate each and every one of you for being here. Now, mistake number 2 is taking advice from people who haven't gone through the process. I remember asking my career guidance counselor how I should best prepare for my investment banking interviews. And she just said, well, use the vault guides that we have through our career guidance center and make sure to, study the technicals like accounting and valuation. Now, technically, none of this is wrong, but it fails to provide a sufficient level of actionable detail that somebody who actually works in investment banking would be able to provide. Let me give you an example to illustrate what I'm trying to say. Now, in investment banking, we use multiple methods to value companies. One of these methods is called comparable company analysis. Now, your professor or any textbooks that you read would call this analysis comparable company analysis, but somebody who actually works in investment banking would tell you that nobody actually says that in reality. On the job, people just say spreading comps. And so if you go into an interview and you start talking about how there are 3 methods to value a business and public company comparable analysis is one of these methods, you're technically not wrong, but compare this to somebody who mentions the phrase spreading comps to an interviewer, and that instantly tells the person interviewing you that you are not just somebody who has studied a textbook and that you actually have some work experience or you actually understand the lingo of the industry. Now, this is just one very specific example. There are many other examples that I could talk about, but the bottom line is, as a student, everyone around you is going to want to give you advice, whether it's your mom, your dad, your brother and sister, your friends, or anyone older than you. And eventually you're bound to get either conflicting advice or advice that just isn't detailed enough to move the needle. And this is why it's so important to network with people working in the jobs that you guys want to eventually pursue, because then you're going straight to the source instead of talking to people who are 2 to 3 degrees removed. Now, mistake number 3 is forgetting that your interviewers are human. Now, as a student, it is very, very easy to put your interviewers on a pedestal, and that's totally understandable. After all, they're in a position of relative authority, status, and prestige, and they're working at the company that you really want to work at as well, so it's natural to look up to them. But the issue arises when you allow this mindset to change your behavior. And what ends up happening is you try a little bit too hard to impress them, or you come across as a little bit too unnatural. And one of the biggest pieces of feedback that I often gave as an interviewer when I was interviewing students for investment banking roles at my firm was that they just came across as too scripted or too robotic. And it wasn't that what they were saying was incorrect, but the delivery of the words just sounded a little bit too canned. And I can personally relate to this because in many of my early interviews, I attempted to use a lot of big, finance words to sound like I knew what I was saying. And, I would memorize all these scripted responses, things like, why do you want to do investment banking? And why do you want to work at our firm? And there's nothing wrong with practicing, but what ended up happening is I relied much too heavily on these scripted responses and came across as too prepared. And I forgot that my interviewers are just normal human beings. If you pretend that your interviewer is like a good friend or someone that you know very well, you're probably going to act a little bit more relaxed and a little bit more casual with them, right? And so this is why you can't rely too heavily on memorization or canned responses, because it takes away the spontaneity and just the natural, relaxed nature that you want to have when you're in an interview. The irony of this whole situation is that interviewers obviously want you to be prepared, but you can't come across as too prepared because that is just a major turnoff. Another big reason why you don't want to pedestalize your interviewers is because, as I mentioned, you'll be really nervous. Think about it like in dating, where if you go on a date with somebody who is really attractive, you're going to be much more nervous and more likely to fumble the bag. But if you remind yourself that they're human and that, they also get anxious and worried and that they're also nervous and, they also go to the bathroom and they also make mistakes just like you, then you're probably not going to be as worried. Now, the same applies to interviewing. You want to treat the interviewer as just another human being. And just because they work in a job that you want to do at a company that you want to work at doesn't make them any different from you. And so you should treat them as you would a good friend. Anyways, that's it for this video, and I hope you guys found it helpful. If you want to learn about the full story of how I ended up working in investment banking, you might want to check out my video on how I went from pre-med to New York investment banking. But anyways, let me know in the comments what you want to see next, and I'll see you guys in the next one.